Are you someone who says yes and then regrets it and feels resentful about it later? Do you find it hard to identify and ask for what it is that you need? Are you constantly overthinking about whether people like you or not, and then you worry about saying the wrong thing? People pleasers, gather here, because that is what this episode is all about today. I'm going to be uncovering what people pleasing is and why and how it shows up in your relationships, and the really significant thing that it stops you from being able to do, and the danger of what being a constant people pleaser has on your emotional well-being and your safety. So buckle in. If you've nodded your head to any of those earlier questions that I've asked and you don't know how to say no, you don't know how to prioritize your needs, and you constantly prioritize the needs of others before your own, then you might be in the people pleaser camp. As a recovering people pleaser, it is something that I have had to work on consciously over the years. It's very easy to fall into that pattern of people pleasing, but the good news is that it's a learned behavior. And why that is significant is because if it's something that you can learn, it is also something that you can unlearn. And that is what we are going to be unpacking today. I'm going to be sharing with you a really quick acronym that you can use to identify whether or not you are a people pleaser. I'm also going to be looking at why it's women that tend to be or are more likely to become people pleasers, and the ways that women have denied listening to their own intuition and disregarded their own safety due to people pleasing, and what the consequences of doing that could potentially be. If you've wanted to learn how to break the pattern of people pleasing so that you can stop focusing on whether people will like you and accept you, and start focusing on having relationships that feel reciprocal and that you're not always jumping through hoops to get people to like you and accept you. If you are ready to just show up in your relationships as your authentic self, then this is definitely the episode that you are going to find lots of understanding, lots of validation, and what your next steps can be so that you can break those unhealthy patterns and have better relationships with yourself and with others. Let's unpack. Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma for Millennial Women, the podcast where we deep dive into relationships, attachment, and healing from relational and childhood trauma. I'm Lysandra Ledgetwood, your host, a psychotherapist and a relationship therapist who works with childhood trauma and high-functioning anxiety in adults. Over the last 14 years, I have been dedicated to helping women just like you to break unhealthy patterns of the past for generational and heart healing. On this podcast, we explore expert insights and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. The first relationship we begin with is the one you have with you. Whether you're single, married, or somewhere in between, if you've experienced childhood trauma or spaces where you've never felt good enough and now you're ready to heal, grow, and build stronger connections, this podcast is for you. I use my personal experience as a therapist and someone who loves personal development and learning about what makes us tick. Join our community of resilient women who are committed to understanding their past, embracing their present, and creating a future filled with trust and love. This is where healing meets growth. So let's dive in and start this journey together. Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma. Where does this idea of people pleasing come from? People pleasing is a term that's come up more recently. And when we think of the term people pleasing, we might just kind of say it very flippantly because it is just a regular, socially acceptable thing that we do. It's really natural for us to want people to like us and to feel accepted. And it's really normal and natural for us to want to feel like we belong. How we're going to think about people pleasing is not in the very normal human sense of wanting to be liked. It's when it's so pervasive that it stops you from being able to just be yourself, be your authentic self, because you are so focused and so worried about how other people might be perceiving you, or just worried that you're going to be rejected worry about how people think about you, and then you just go into this overthinking spiral. So we're not talking about it in the very human relational way that we people please, but we're looking at it from a lens of where we might be actually having underlying anxiety that we're not addressing. Because the underlying anxiety when it comes to people pleasing is really feeling as though you don't belong, and you try to project a different version of yourself, or a version of yourself that you think will be accepted by the people around you. And it happens because we, especially as women, we have been socially conditioned to be kind, to be selfless, to put other people above ourselves. And that's really seen as a token of like being a good person. And being a good person is not the same thing as being a people pleaser. We're so conditioned in society to be good girls, to smile even when we don't feel like smiling, to be polite. If I just take it to this extreme, because I watch a lot of documentaries and things related around serial killers. I know it's very left field, but stick with me. I watch a lot of things about like serial killers and like murders and how those happen. And one of the things that have come out of those documentaries, and looking at high profile serial killers and the kind of things that they would do to lure their victims in, is especially when they would go after women, right? They would pretend that they would be injured. So as an example, right, Ted Bundy, who was a well-known serial killer, he used to pretend to be in need of some sort. So he would like put on a leg cast or put his arm in a brace and be like, oh, I need some help to get this stuff into my car. And because women are so conditioned to be helpful, they would see a guy who, in their opinion, they thought was good looking, which I don't know what the hell they were looking at, but anyway, that's a different thing. But because they were trying to be accommodating, even though a lot of the time, and the women who actually survived his attacks would say he looked like perhaps I shouldn't trust him, and there was something in my instinct that told me not to, but they override their natural instinct because the thought of being helpful is so conditioned and such a part of what's expected of women that they literally rubbished their own intuition and went on to help this serial killer. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that every time you people please, you're going to end up meeting a Ted Bundy. That's a very extreme example. But at the same time, I think it's a useful example to show there's so many ways that we can put ourselves in harm if we're not paying attention to not only our intuition, but understanding where our people pleasing comes from and why we're people pleasing, or why we're trying to give beyond our means in the moment. We also learn about how we show up as women, especially from the women around us. And I don't know about you, but I grew up around a lot of women in my life, a lot of strong women. But in a lot of ways, there were also women who would, and I don't know if you've got people like this in your life, who do too much, essentially. Like they do all the things, always busy, always helping someone, always cooking for this person, going to attend a function for that person, always being that person who other people call and rely on to help them, whether it's at an event, whether it is babysitting, like no matter what it is, like taking people to the airport, all of these just random different things that they have to do alongside being a mum, being a wife, in full-time employment, all of these different hats that they have to wear, and not taking the time for themselves to recognize when they need to rest, when they need to stop. And even though they complain, but they don't do anything about it, they just keep doing the same things that cause them to essentially feel like crap, that cause them to feel worn out, which causes burnout, which causes just constantly feeling like you're giving and giving, but you're not pouring into yourself and you're not getting much of that energy back. And if you've been around women who do this repeatedly, we start to internalize some of that as, oh, this is what it means to be a woman. This is what it means to show up for people in your relationships. This is how you be a nice person. But being a nice person and being a people pleaser are two very different things. And the psychology and science behind it is that people pleasing is actually the fourth trauma response. You've probably heard of fight, flight, freeze. The fourth trauma response is fawn, aka people pleasing. And that's because our nervous systems are wired to feel like we belong. As humans, as a human species, we're designed to want to be in community, to have safety, because in prehistoric times, safety was in numbers. And so if we felt like we were going to be ostracized, that would put us in immediate danger because we need to survive in groups. And so that same evolutionary biology is still within us. It's still within our nervous systems, so that if something happens and we feel like we're going to be ostracized or pushed out of our community, that's where the fourth trauma response comes in, because our bodies are wired to detect our perception of danger. And the perception of danger is, oh, this person doesn't love me, this person is judging me, or I don't belong. And the really unhelpful part of people pleasing isn't that you're a nice person and that you always do things for people, because again, like I said, that's just being a nice person. The thing that makes it quite toxic for you and toxic for your well-being and can lead to burnout and depression is when you keep consistently putting other people's needs above your own, but when it's at your own detriment. So when it goes against what you might need, when it goes against listening to what your, not only like your relational needs are, so what you need from your relationships, but also just thinking about yourself like on a very basic level of taking care of eating, sleeping, getting enough rest, the basics. When you keep saying yes to things that you are actually quite uncomfortable with doing and then you later go back and then you regret it, that's like a sure sign of, oh, okay, I'm a bit of a people pleaser, or I am overcompensating for something. Someone asked me some time ago if people pleasing is a form of manipulation. And I suppose in a way, in a very black and white way, yes, there is an element of it being manipulation. But if there's one thing that you should know about me and the way that I work and the way that I kind of view things is that nothing is ever just black and white, and there's always nuance. There's a different perspective, and we have to look at things in a deeper level rather than just looking at things on a very surface level. It's about unpicking things and unpacking things, and there being lots of different ways to understand something. And although people pleasing is a way of trying to, I suppose, get people to like you, whatever version of you that you think will be acceptable, that's where I suppose the deception comes in, because you're almost transforming into something or someone that you might not actually be. You're kind of doing it hoping that if you present in a certain way, that person's going to be drawn to you more, or they're going to like you more. And so that might mean that you're hiding aspects of yourself because you're trying to present as somebody who is likable. Maybe you're trying to pretend that you like something that you don't, that you're interested in things that you're not really interested in, or you just agree with things that are outside of your actual integrity. You might be agreeing with things that actually they don't even align with your values, but because of the environment you're in, you're kind of just like, yeah, agreeing, even though it's entirely against what your actual beliefs are. And quite often, if you are reacting to things out of the fog, so remember this acronym, FOG, fear, obligation, guilt. If you are responding or reacting out of those three things, then you're likely not responding in a way that is actually authentic to you. And if you are a people pleaser and you are prioritizing people's needs above your own consistently or just too much, then I just encourage you to take a step back and start thinking about what your actual needs are. And you probably need to set yourself some good old-fashioned boundaries, because the thing that heals people pleasing is actually just better boundaries. And you can start that by listening to what your intuition is telling you. And a very simple way of doing that is if somebody asks something of you, asks you to do something, before you give your automatic response of, yep, sure, I can do that, even if you know that you can because your diary is free or you're available, just give yourself some time. Take a pause and give yourself some time and say something along the lines of, I'm not sure, can I get back to you? Because what you're doing is you're giving yourself some time to actually think about it rather than just responding automatically in the moment. which is something very typically that you can do. If you're used to just always saying yes to things because you don't like saying no, you're going to respond to things very quickly. And it's not always about, is your diary free? That's not the only reason to say yes to things. Sometimes you can say no just because you're tired, innit? Like you've had a long day at work or you've had a long week and you just want to sit by yourself and do some self-care, or you just want to sit and watch Netflix. Like, that's okay. You don't need to over explain or be busy to not do something. And this is what I mean by thinking about what you actually need. Because when you start listening more to what your body needs and stop focusing on, oh, I'm here just to be helpful. Yeah, of course, it's great to be a nice person. It's great to be helpful. But that's not the only thing that you have going for you. That's not the only reason why people are drawn to you, or the only reason why people want to be around you. Is not just because of what you can do to help them. And if it is, then you probably need to readjust your relationships and do a bit of an audit of the kind of relationships you have in your life. Now, when you are a people pleaser, you are going to find boundaries really uncomfortable to begin with. You know what? That's okay. That's okay to find it uncomfortable, because new things are uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable. But in order for you to start having relationships that feel more balanced and not feeling like you're always overgiving, you're always the one that's showing up for people and then people just don't show up for you. In order for you to have that realignment, that rebalance, those healthy relationships with self and other, then you're kind of going to have to pull on your big girl pants and start working on setting boundaries. I do have a boundaries guide. So if you want to go and grab that, I am going to put it in the show notes, and it will give you some tips to get you started. And you can join the Facebook group where we talk about boundaries as well. And there's lots of information out there on boundaries at the moment. If you're not already, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok, which are the main platforms that I use. But there's so much information out there that can help you with setting boundaries, that can teach you how to notice when it's time to say no and also when it's time to say yes. So let's break down the idea of being a good person. Means that you have to be always available to people. And the only way you can do that is to meet their needs while totally crapping on your own. Like, both of those things can coexist. We can be good people and we can also say no to things, and we can show up when we have the emotional and physical capacity to do so. Okay, I think I've said plenty, and I'm going to leave you to stew on that for a little bit and process this new information and see what comes up. Maybe you want to get your journal out. Maybe different things will come up for you. Maybe new light bulbs will go off as you start to make more connections and understand yourself more. And if that's happened, I've done my job here. All right, talk to you soon. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.